Qiandao Lake means Thousand Island Lake in Chinese. It's a freshwater reservoir in China created in 1959 after the government dammed the Shannan River. The place got its name from the 1,078 large islands that dot the lake. It's frankly quite beautiful, and you would not expect it to be the spot of a crucial turning point in Taiwanese history. A brutal crime at Qiandao Lake in 1994 tipped the scales away from Chinese reunification more towards ambivalence and even possibly Taiwanese independence. As 1994 rolled around, the cultural exchanges between China and Taiwan had been flourishing. In 1987, Chiang Ching-kuo ended martial law on the island after many decades. Relations were warming between both sides of the strait. Taking advantage of this political thaw, Taiwanese flocked to the mainland to tour the lands and get reconnected to their roots. There was a sort of China fever sweeping across the island as Taiwanese started to feel like they were reclaiming their Chineseness. Reunification seemed imminent. But soon cracks had started to change the relationship. People began to realize the differences between themselves and those on the mainland, especially in culture, outlook, and just general attitude. But it seemed like those differences would not be all that important. They're the sort of things that tend to stay hidden away underneath the surface but emerge only after some time has passed, preferably after political reunification. But the incident had changed all of that. On March 31st, 1994, a tourist ferry named the Hairui was hijacked by a number of people while on the lake. The details of what exactly happened will probably never be clear, but 32 people on board of the ship at the time were killed. This includes 24 passengers from Taiwan and 8 Chinese crew and tour guides. The passengers and crew were bundled up, locked into a restricted room below deck, and stayed there even after the perpetrators set the ferry on fire. Evidence pointed to a potential robbery. This was obviously a huge tragedy that needed to be handled with care, and it wasn't. When 55 of the deceased relatives made the trip out to the mainland to collect the bodies and pay their respects, they were expecting sympathy and at least some understanding. But it quickly became clear that the local government authorities were more interested in protecting themselves and their reputation. The families were not allowed to see the bodies or bring them back home for burial until they were first cremated. Relatives were also astonished to find that Chinese officials had performed autopsies without first securing permission. In addition, the local government did not show much interest in thoroughly investigating the event. Their first explanations for what had happened to the Hairui was that it had been a simple fire. The whole thing had just been an accident. But like I said, the bodies were piled up and locked downstairs underneath the deck inside an off-limits area that the passengers would not be able to access normally. The fire theory also does not explain why nobody jumped into the water to swim to safety, nor does it explain the numerous bullet holes in the boat's hull. Furthermore, the Chinese authorities harassed reporters and confiscated images and videos taken at the scene. This image is taken from a broadcast, and you can see it's from a far distance. Taiwanese government officials were prevented from accessing the area to help the families. The Taiwanese people began protesting against not only the local Chinese authorities, but also against the governing Kuomintang party for not having the spine to stand up for its people. The premier accused China of flagrant human rights violations, and future President Lee Teng-hui called them bandits. The local Chinese government finally reacted to the outcry from the Taiwanese, and they mobilized what you would call an investigation. It took them only 12 days from when the incident occurred to announce that they had gotten their guys. On April 11, 1994, 3 people were arrested for the crime, and the government announced that they would be punished. All 3 people were in their 20s. One was a former PLA, the Communist Party's armed forces soldier, and the other 2 were his associates. It seems sort of implausible to anyone, though, at the time that any 3 people in their 20s, even if one of them is a former soldier, can overpower a ship of 32 people, which includes tour guides and crew. For what it's worth, Taiwan's intelligence agency have their own theory that the massacre was carried out by 8 to 10 renegade soldiers from the PLA. To me personally, this seems more plausible. In the end, this horrible incident and the subsequent deplorable treatment of the families by the local government ended the China fever and jump-started the independent Taiwan movement. From then on, people would feel much more sympathetic towards creating their own identity separate from that of China's. and scandalously, a country for themselves. After the Qiandao Lake incident, public opinion polls found that support for Taiwanese independence grew from 29% to 37%. At the same time, the people's identification with being solely Chinese dropped from 24% to 12%. That was 58%. The flow of Taiwanese from the mainland declined from 1.5 million to 1.1 million, depriving the mainland of precious tourist dollars. The Chinese leadership at first waved this off as mere politicking and jawboning from politicians looking to make themselves look good in front of the populace, only to realize a little too late that this was turning into a growing trend, a budding trend that in a few years would be cemented into place by the missile threats made by the PRC in 1995 and 1996 in response to Taiwan's impending first presidential election. The outright antagonism would in fact have the opposite effect and guarantee the election of Kuomintang candidate Li Denghui. To be honest, I'm a little shocked. I've only found out about this incident relatively recently. When you go through the history and what's available on stuff like Wikipedia, you don't really find much mention of it. I had to dig deep into Chinese language sources. Yet at the same time, I would say it's a pivotal event. It's the start of a major reversal in public opinion that pushed Taiwan away from China after a long period in time in which a warm, publicly supported reunification seemed possible.